I didn't expect it to happen that day. There was no grand build-up, no romantic gesture that set the stage, no flowers or soft candlelight. It wasn't even a quiet, private moment where the world stood still. In fact, it was the exact opposite. I was running late for work, too late, and as usual he was waiting at the corner of the coffee shop like he always did, like he always knew I'd be there. We didn't talk much in the mornings. Our relationship had always been one of those quiet, unspoken understandings, where words were less important than the soft weight of our presence next to each other. He never asked for more. I never gave more. It was comfortable. Until that morning. As I rushed past him, hands full with my phone, keys, and coffee, I felt something strange, a coldness. Not the kind from the morning air, but something deeper. I glanced up at him, expecting our usual glance and the quick smile he gave before I rushed off. But instead, I froze. He wasn't smiling. His eyes weren't filled with that usual warmth, that softness I'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years. No, they were hard, almost angry even. It was a look I had never seen before, and before I could say anything, before I could try to ask him what was wrong, he spoke. "I can't do this anymore." My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to laugh, to think this was some kind of sick joke, but there was no trace of humor in his eyes, no playful glint. It was serious, too serious. "What do you mean?" I asked, the words barely coming out of my mouth. He shook his head, a small, sad smile forming on his lips as if he had already made up his mind. "I can't keep pretending like everything's okay." I felt like the world had just shifted on its axis. My hands trembled, coffee spilling slightly, and in that moment the whole city seemed to fade away. The rush of people, the honking of cars, the hum of the morning, it all became muffled, distant. It was just the two of us, standing on that street corner, and yet the distance between us felt like miles. "Stop," I said, my voice shaking. I wasn't ready to hear what he was about to say. "Please don't do this." But he wasn't looking at me anymore. His gaze was somewhere beyond me, like he was already somewhere else, and it terrified me. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I love you, but I can't keep pretending I don't want more." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never seen him like this, never even imagined it. I wanted to scream, to shout at him to stop, to ask why, to beg him to stay. But in the midst of the shock, I couldn't bring myself to do anything except stand there frozen. I should have known, I realized later, that something had been off. We hadn't talked in days. He had been pulling away. And I, lost in the whirlwind of my own life, had ignored it. I had ignored him. But what was the worst part? What truly sent me reeling? It wasn't the words he said. It wasn't even the weight of the pain that suddenly wrapped itself around my chest. It was the fact that, in that moment, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing him. I wasn't afraid of anything anymore. I was afraid of what I had never said to him. Because I knew, deep down, that I had never loved him the way he had loved me. And I had never let myself. Until now. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, I stood there, frozen in that unbearable silence, staring at him with wide eyes, trying to make sense of his words. I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing until he turned to walk away, his back to me, the weight of his departure suffocating me more than any words ever could. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice a mix of desperation and confusion. He didn't stop, didn't even look back. He kept walking, his shoulders stiff, like he was running away from something far more dangerous than just me. And I, standing on that street corner, felt every part of my body tremble, not from the cold, but from the realization that I had just watched the most important person in my life slip through my fingers. I had no idea how long I stood there, paralyzed by the shock, watching him disappear into the sea of people. Time seemed irrelevant. I kept telling myself that this wasn't real, that he couldn't just walk away like this after everything we had shared. But the truth was, he could. He had. And somehow, I hadn't seen it coming. The distance between us had grown so gradually that it was imperceptible, until it wasn't. It felt like I had woken up from a long dream, only to find that the person I thought I was meant to be with wasn't there anymore, and I had no idea where to go from here. In the following days, I replayed that moment over and over in my mind. I'd text him, leave voicemails, anything to reach him, but nothing. He didn't respond. Every attempt only made it worse, as if the space between us had grown wider and wider, swallowing up any hope I had left. I asked myself how I could have missed it. How could I not have seen the signs? But in my heart, I knew. I had been blind on purpose. I had been running from the truth, hiding behind the safety of what was familiar, too afraid to confront the emotions that had been slowly consuming me. What he had said that day wasn't just a confession of love. It was an accusation of my own fear. My fear of stepping into something real, of feeling something deep. And I had let that fear dictate every decision. By the end of the week, I was a wreck, unraveled, fraying at the edges. I would sit in my apartment, looking at the empty space between the couch and the kitchen table, where we had once shared countless quiet evenings, and wonder where it all went wrong. It wasn't just the silence that bothered me. It was the absence of him, the empty space that felt like a gaping hole where love had once been. And that's when it hit me, like a flood of truth I could no longer ignore. I wasn't mourning the love I had lost. I was mourning the love I had never given. I had never told him how I felt. I had never been brave enough to say the words that had been pressing against my chest, threatening to burst free. I love you, I realized in that moment, would have been the most important thing I could have ever said to him. But now it was too late. And then, just as the weight of everything I had failed to do threatened to crush me, my phone buzzed with a single, unread message. His name flashed across the screen, and for the first time in days, my heart skipped a beat, hope sparking through the haze of regret. It was a simple text, just a few words, but they were more than enough to shatter the fragile wall I had tried to build around my emotions. I never stopped loving you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, everything I had wanted to hear, but in the form of something I could never take back. What had I been waiting for? Why had I let him walk away? What was left now, except for the haunting truth that I had been given a second chance to love, and I might just screw it up all over again? I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, the words vibrating in front of me as if they were daring me to respond. I never stopped loving you, he had written. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. The irony of it all hit me like a wave crashing over my chest. Here he was, pouring his heart out, confessing everything I had been too afraid to admit. I wanted to reply, to pour out everything that had been suffocating me, everything I had been holding back for years. But there was a problem. I didn't know how. How do you tell someone that you love them when you've spent so much time convincing yourself that you didn't? How do you express a truth you've hidden so deep, even from yourself? And worse, how do you do it when you've already allowed them to slip through your fingers once? I paced around my apartment, phone still in hand, heart thundering in my chest, torn between the burning need to respond and the fear that I had waited too long. What if I told him, finally, after all this time, that I loved him, and it was too late? What if he had already moved on, already realized that he deserved more than someone who couldn't even admit their feelings? What if my hesitation had created a chasm so wide that no words, no apologies could ever bridge it again? The self-doubt consumed me. I had been so terrified of the possibility of losing him that I never realized I had been losing him all along. One moment of silence, one unspoken word at a time. And now, this message, this fragile hope, felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of everything I had failed to say when I still had the chance. I collapsed onto the couch, my eyes fixed on the screen, and in the quiet of the room I realized something else. He had apologized. He had acknowledged the hurt. And somehow that made everything worse. It wasn't just that I had failed him. It was that I had never let him in, never given him the chance to see all the parts of me that had been buried, hidden out of fear. What had he seen in me that made him wait this long? What had I missed? And then, in the depths of my confusion, a sickening thought crossed my mind. What if he didn't love me the way I thought? What if, all along, his love was nothing more than a comfort, a safety net, and I had only ever been a placeholder in his life, someone to pass the time until he found what he truly needed? I couldn't do it. I couldn't just let my fear and my past define everything we could be. So I did what I should have done years ago. I pressed the reply button, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. I had no grand speech ready. No perfect words, just raw, unfiltered honesty. I love you too, I always have. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The moment I released my grip on the phone, I felt the flood of emotions wash over me. Relief, joy, and, oddly enough, a sense of loss. There was no guarantee that he would still feel the same way. No guarantee that the years of silence and distance could be erased with just a few simple words. But it was the best I could do. I could no longer hide behind my fear. No longer hide behind the walls I had built to keep myself safe. I had to give him the chance to decide if we were worth the risk, or if, like everything else in my life, I had already let him go. And then the unexpected happened. As I sat there, heart pounding in my chest, waiting for a reply that could very well change everything, my phone buzzed again. A new message. His name lit up the screen. I opened it, and this time there were no words. Just a single, simple image, a picture of the two of us from the first time we met. We were laughing, so carefree, so happy. And beneath it he had written, "I never gave up on us." That was it. No more apologies, no more hesitation. Just the weight of the past, the present, and the future, all hanging in the air, waiting to be claimed. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, the best day of my life was still waiting to happen. The message lingered on the screen, taunting me. A reminder of the quiet, powerful love we had once shared. But it wasn't just the photo or the words beneath it that struck me. It was the feeling behind it. The love I had long ignored had never disappeared. It had simply been waiting, like a dormant seed beneath the surface, ready to bloom when I was finally brave enough to see it. For so long I had buried myself in excuses, rationalizing my inability to fully commit to him, to us. But now, with his image in front of me, something inside me broke free. The fear, the uncertainty, the years of pretending that I didn't care as much as I did, all of it crumbled in that single moment. I thought about how many times I had told myself I wasn't ready, how many times I had justified holding back. There had been those fleeting moments when I felt the undeniable pull to reach out, to share the depth of what I felt, but I always held myself back, convincing myself that love was something that could wait until I was ready. But how could I ever be ready when I had already been given everything I needed? He had waited for me. He had been patient with my uncertainty, never once pushing me, always leaving space for me to find my way. And here in this simple, raw exchange, he had handed me everything I needed to make a choice, to take the leap. And now it was my turn. I typed back quickly, my fingers flying over the keyboard. I'm ready now. I'm sorry I made you wait. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the grand gesture I had always imagined when I thought of the day I would tell him everything. But it was honest, and for the first time, I felt the words leaving my heart without hesitation. I hit send and sat back, the anticipation bubbling in my chest. The minutes felt like an eternity as I waited for his response, my mind spinning with all the possible outcomes. What if he didn't feel the same anymore? What if he had moved on completely? What if my words, my timing, weren't enough to fix what I had broken? Then the phone buzzed again. His reply came almost immediately. I opened it, my hands shaking with excitement and fear. He had written only 2 words, "Come to me." That was it. No flowery declarations, no elaborate explanations. Just a simple invitation that spoke volumes. It wasn't about fixing the past or explaining away all the mistakes. It was about what we could create now in the present. The weight of that message hit me like a wave, pulling me into its undertow. There was no longer any room for doubts. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to convince him of my feelings. He knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. And he wanted me, despite all the mess, despite the years of silence. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight of fear that had held me down for so long had finally loosened its grip, and I was free. I didn't know what would happen next or where this would take us, but I knew one thing. I had the chance to rewrite our story, to stop pretending that love could be put on pause, to stop hiding from the vulnerability that had always been there, just waiting for me to let it in. This was the beginning of something, I realized. The beginning of something raw and real, unguarded and honest. And for the first time in my life, I felt ready to live it. I didn't need to hold my breath anymore. I could finally exhale, step forward, and embrace whatever came next. Because in that moment, standing on the brink of whatever was to come, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I never had been. I didn't know how long it took me to get to him, how long the walk felt between our past and the future we were about to build. It could have been minutes or hours, but what mattered was that I was on my way. Each step I took felt lighter, like I was shedding years of indecision, of holding back. My mind kept replaying the photo he had sent me, our laughter frozen in time. And with each passing moment, I realized something that had eluded me for so long. I had been running from the very thing I needed the most. The love I feared, the love I thought wasn't enough, was exactly the thing that would save me. He was the one who had always seen me, truly seen me. And now, I was finally ready to see him back, without the walls, without the excuses. When I arrived at his place, standing at the door where I had stood so many times before, everything felt so different. The air between us wasn't thick with tension or regret. It was wide open, like the doors I was about to walk through. He didn't ask me for an explanation. He didn't need one. The moment I stepped inside, the world outside disappeared. There was just him and me, the space between us charged with a promise that was both terrifying and beautiful. "I never wanted anything more than this," he whispered, his voice hoarse but full of something I couldn't name. And it wasn't that I had to say it back, but it was understood. The love I had kept hidden for so long was finally free, filling every corner of the room, enveloping us. It was in the way he looked at me, the way his fingers brushed against mine, as if we were both waiting for permission to touch the parts of ourselves that had been so carefully locked away. And then, as if the weight of all the years had finally come crashing down, I realized something else. This was not just the day he told me he loved me. It was the day I finally loved myself enough to accept the truth, to stop running, to stop hiding from the possibility that love was not something I had to control, but something that had always been there, patiently waiting for me to trust it, to trust him. As we stood there in that quiet space between us, I understood that the best day of my life wasn't the moment I realized I loved him. It was the moment I understood that love was never about being ready, but about being willing to take the leap, even when everything inside of you tells you to run. I had spent so long waiting for the right time, for the perfect moment to tell him everything, but the truth was that love had always been there, waiting for me to find the courage to believe in it. And now, as his arms pulled me close, the last of my doubts faded away. This was it, the leap, and I was no longer afraid to fall.